I want you to picture this for just a second. Imagine a world in which all types of fuel for our vehicles suddenly disappeared. Imagine a world in which any type of fuel, whether it's fossil fuels or electric, just suddenly disappear. What would that world look like? 1.5 billion vehicles would be just basically stranded, right, on the road or whatever they were left. I asked AI, I went on an AI site and I asked, what would cities look like if this were to happen? Here's kind of what it came up with. It was just a generated image, right? It's like everything, all civilization stops, basically. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that, in fact, if it were my take, I think here's what it would look like in the future. You would just have cars that have been modified. In fact, that if it were here in Troy, in Lincoln County, that would be an F-150, right? The muffler just as big, just doesn't make any sound. So here's what happens. We rely so much on fuel that thinking about a world that has no fuel is kind of hard. It's almost overwhelming. It's hard to picture what it would look like. Now, let me ask you this. What would the world look like without love? That sounds a little poetic, but I'm not talking about any poetry. I'm just saying, think about this. It's hard to picture, just like it's hard to picture fuel. What would life look without love? What would this world look like without love? I can tell you that we get glimpses of what it looks like. We get glimpses all the time, right? You hear the crimes that happen on the streets. You hear the suffering that takes place in people's families. You hear rivalries between siblings. You hear fights between people that used to love each other. You hear of society overall just becoming more and more evil and against one another and angry. And I can tell you, you can see even bigger glimpses at war, where you get to the point where you're killing one another. And every time one person kills one of this side, this person kills 5 of this side, and this person turns around and kills another 10 of this side. And it never ends, and it never could end. Without love, we would just dissolve into basic instincts of survival. And so, here's what is interesting to me, that I totally understand why in this world there are people that have a hard time loving. I mean, there are so many factors, right, that help us either love or be loving, or maybe be just a little bit hesitant to love anyone. Maybe we've been hurt. Maybe you've received relationships in your life that hurt your soul, your spirit, and now you're hesitant to do it. And in the world, like, I can totally see that. But here's what we need to ask ourselves. Let's not think about the world so much. Let's think about the church. How is it that all of us who have been born again, who have received a new heart, right? The Bible says when you receive Jesus, you receive a new heart. The Bible says that we receive the help of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit comes into our lives to empower us. How is it that we still struggle to love? How is it that love becomes so difficult for followers of Jesus in spite of all the gifts that we've been given? The reality is that it's not easy, right? It's not simple. But here's what I do see Christians doing, all of us. Why are we still condescending toward other people who have different beliefs than we do? Or maybe different sexual orientation or race? Why is it that it's hard to love someone when we disagree with them? When we don't have the same beliefs, all of a sudden it becomes hard for us to love them. Why is it that we turn a blind eye to the people that are suffering around us? To the people that maybe don't exactly have all that we have? Because we can sit here, and if I were to ask you, do you love others? You would say yes. We all think that we do love others. But here's what happens. If you walk down the street, it's so easy to turn a blind eye toward people that maybe are in suffering, or homeless, or that are disabled, and we don't know how to love them many times. Why is it that we harbor resentment toward other people, refusing to forgive? It's like we hold resentment as a weapon, and we just hold it, and we don't offer it grace and forgiveness. Why is it that we criticize harshly others and judge them hypocritically overlooking our own shortcomings. We don't see our own shortcomings. And so when you start thinking about this idea of love as a concept is kind of easy to understand. We feel like love is this warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when you like to be around someone else. But the reality is that in practical terms, love is hard to live out. And even though we talk about it a lot at church, I feel like when you look at Christianity overall and the regular churchgoer, we have a hard time loving others. Because here's what's happened. We've come to this place where we are only willing to love those who look like us and who agree with us. And if they don't, then we just we don't necessarily, I don't say that we hate them, but we also refuse sometimes to take the step toward them. It's like we're saying, you can come to me, but I'm not going to you. The problem is that Jesus did the opposite, right? He was in heaven, and he decided to take a step toward us. Incarnation itself is the step that he took to say, I'm not just going to be here judging the world. I'm going to go into the world. I'm going to be one of you in order to save you. In fact, Romans chapter 5 talks about this. He says, you see, and I love how Paul words this. It's not on your screens, but I'm just going to tell it to you. He says, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. He didn't die for the godly. He didn't die for those who were seeking him already. He didn't die, for those who were already on the right track. He died for all of us who were lost in our sin. He says, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So Christ's love is a different kind of love. It's not a love that hopes to get back. He just gave. Even when we weren't even aware of him. We weren't even aware that he wanted to have a relationship with us. And so this is where we're going to get to that first part of John chapter, the third epistle of John, because he's going to talk about what it looks like to love in word, to love in action, and to love with our presence, by being present. And so we're going to go ahead and read it. And it's such a short book that we're going to read the entire thing. So here's what it looks like. Edras, if you can put it up there. Thank you. And by the way, if you were with us last week, you got to read an entire book of the Bible. If you're here with us today, this is week 2, 2 books in a row, okay? You can say, man, I've read 2 books of the Bible in the last 2 weeks. Okay, if you follow along with me, let's just go to the Lord and read this book. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you're doing for the brothers and sisters. Even though they are strangers to you, they have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name. Man, it's so cool to see a letter like this, because it's like you're a witness to what was happening in the church in the first century. The Apostle John is sending a letter, and this is basically what's happening. He is sending a letter to a guy named Gaius, who was probably one of his disciples, and he leaves him at this church more than likely, and he hears that he's welcoming other Christians. Now, who is he talking about welcoming? Remember, in the first century, before all of the New Testament was formed, Christians relied, number one, on the Old Testament scriptures, but number two, relied on the teaching of the apostles and traveling teachers and prophets that God had provided. And so God would give a teaching to some of the apostles, and they would go and teach as they could. And then people that they would, would have this gift of teaching through the Holy Spirit, they would also go and teach the same things at different churches. And because they didn't have a Bible like we do, then they had to rely on that. And so that's why last week in 2 John, he's saying, there are some people that are teaching false things about Jesus. And this time, he's saying, hey, you've been receiving these teachers that are teaching the truth, and I want you to receive another guy named Demetrius. And he is good. He's testifying of the truth. But there's a big problem in John, that though Gaius is showing them love in tangible ways, there's a guy who does not want to show love in tangible ways. And I think that's the problem with this letter. This is why this letter was written. The name of this gentleman was Diotrephes. He's a guy that has character, but has no charity. It's all character, but no love. In other words, he may know the doctrine. In fact, you can see that Diotrephes has basically, John doesn't say anything bad about his doctrine or about his teaching. He simply shows that he has no love. Let's read verses 9 and 10. I want to start here because I feel like this is where the epistle goes from. He says, I wrote to the church by Diotrephes, who loves to be first. Maybe the problem with Diotrephes' lack of love is that he wants to be first. And he says, he will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. The problem with Diotrephes is that he wants to be first. And the problem that we have and why it's hard to love is that for us to love requires us to die to ourselves. Love requires us to put down our wants, sometimes the things that we want, and to give to others. In other words, love isn't going to be fair, isn't going to be just. If you're wanting that, that's not the kind of love that Christ offered us. It's the kind of love that we as humans tend to give. In fact, there's a moment in Jesus' ministry where he stops and tells the disciples, listen, you know how the Gentiles can give, to those who they receive from. In other words, they love those who love him back. He's like, but you ought to be different. You need to love those who are unloved, those people who it's not easy to love, those who persecute you. Those are the people that you need to love. The problem with love and actually living it out is that it requires you and I to die to ourselves a little bit each time that we love the way that Jesus loved us. And if we don't do it, the problem is that we are buying into, we're basically eliminating the most powerful weapon that Christianity has. See, over the centuries, what made Christianity powerful is the fact that we reacted differently than most people reacted. So when people persecuted Christians, they loved them back. When people killed them and cursed them, they blessed them and prayed for them. When people weren't kind to them, they would be kind and generous to others. But I'm afraid that the church today, we're taking a different stance. We're taking a stance where it's like, hey, if you do me good, I'll do good back to you. But if you don't, then don't. I'm not going to bother you, go out of my way to bother you, but I'm also not going to go and do good to your family or to your life. In other words, we've drawn a line. and we think that we need to stand on our side and you stay on your side. And this is the opposite of what Jesus did. Jesus crossed the line from heaven to earth and said, I'm going to reach out to you. And today, Christians, we need to reach that line and say, I don't care. It's complicated, right? You disagree with me. You don't see the world as I see it. But I'm going to cross that line and I'm going to reach out to you and show you that I love you. And that's what John is going to call us to do in his gospel and his epistles. He's going to encourage us to love in word with our words, to love in action, and to be present to love others. Let's talk about him. Love in word. As we read this short epistle, there is a word that comes up over and over again, and it's this word, dear friend. And this word that is, is translated as dear friend, is actually a Greek word that is agapetos. And agapetos is one of the kinds of word. It means beloved one or loved one. And it's one of the words that is used in Greek to describe love. Now, in Greek, there were 4 different words for love. One was eros, which meant like more of a romantic or sexual love. That's where the word like erotic comes from, eros, erotic. Then there is also the word phileo, which it was more like likeness. You like something, or the friendship type of love. So when we talk about, anything that has philia at the end, you love those things. That's the kind of love. You like those things. And then there is another word, storge, which was a familial type of love. You love your family because they're family members, right? They're blood. That's kind of love. But there was a love that was above all of them, agape. This kind of love was a divine type of love, more of a commitment, a decision than a feeling. That's the type of love that Christ wants us to have. And that's a love that is hard to live out. And so John calls his friend agapeto, or beloved one, or loved one, 4 times in just 14 verses. And each time, he's going to express it something different to him. So here's what I want to know. Now, here's what sometimes happens. We need to be able to love in word. Loving in word is something that may sometimes gets overlooked because people say, you need to show your love. But I will say that I think we need to be shown love, but also we need to hear it. I grew up in a family it's a good family. Some of you got to know my mom when she was still alive, and she was a good woman. She always was. She loved the Lord. And my dad wasn't a follower of Jesus, but he was a good man. He worked hard. He was honest. But one of the things that, even though I grew up in a good family, one of the things I never experienced was just being told that I was loved all the time. I just didn't. They didn't say it. I knew they loved me. They acted like they loved me, but they didn't say it. And so that has made it difficult for me at times to be able to express love just openly. So one of the things that Julie and I try to do when the kids were little is just to start saying, I love you a lot more often, all the time. In fact, it was so noticeably different that when my mom came for the first time to visit and see the kids, she kind of made fun of me. She's like, you guys say I love you all the time. And I'm like, yeah, we kind of do. But then she got on the bandwagon and she was saying it as well, at the end. And so we need to be able to say it. So if it is difficult for you because in your family background, you weren't told, I love you a lot, I'm going to give you 4 E's as to how you can love well with your words. The first one is simple. Just express it. Express it. Like John, the first time that he says, my dear friend Gaius, he says, whom I love in the truth. It's simple. You don't have to add any embellishing words. You just can say, I love you. Or, hey, I love you. And I love the fact that John says, I love you in truth. Because this is what is required for us to be able to express that well with our words. We need to have our identity founded in the love of Jesus. When we say the words, I love you, to anyone, there's a big risk, right? Now, guys, if you are past the teen years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is a risk here. Every time you express how you feel to someone, especially a girl that you like, there's a chance that those 3 words can go south really fast, right? It's when you're mustering the strength to say, I gotta tell her. I just gotta say it, right? And you're gathering the strength and you're praying and you're, You may not be Catholic, but you're bringing all the saints down with you. You say the words, I love you. Now, there's a chance that she says, I love you back. There's a chance that she says, thank you, right? That's the worst, ladies, by the way, that's the worst. There's a chance that there can be an awkward silence, right? Right there. Whatever happens, saying I love you requires a risk from us. You're being vulnerable. And which is why, actually, that vulnerability is actually why people have a hard time saying it. This is why there are families like mine that we grew up and we knew that we loved each other, but we never said it because you're making yourself vulnerable. This is why John says, hey, I love you in the truth of the gospel, the truth of Jesus. Because it is only when we are in this truth that we can receive and have the courage and to be fearless to say, I love you. Here's the second E. You embrace people's needs. You embrace people's needs. You express it, but then you embrace their needs. Listen to verse 2. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. Man, that's an awesome place to be, right? That Gaius, this guy, like one of the apostles, Jesus' beloved one, says, man, I'm so glad your soul is doing well. But then there's a prayer request. He's like, I pray that the rest of you, your body is doing well as well. We don't know exactly what was going on with Gaius' health. All we know is that John is praying for his health. So there could be something there. What I do want to point is that John took the time to just pay attention. One of the things that we have to do is simply embrace people's needs. Is pay attention, be observant, and then make him feel known and seen and noticed. And when you pay attention to those little things, it's going to make a difference. One of the easiest forms of showing that love is simply by expressing it, by saying, hey, I noticed that, right? Hey, you needed something, or, I noticed that you were a little bit sad or a little bit quiet, or I noticed, that you asked for this prayer request, whatever it may be. Those little things, when you let them know that you notice them, it makes a difference. Even you can maybe sometimes say it through words. You can also do it through small acts of kindness and appreciation. And that is still a way to just show them, verbally, and also to let them know that you were noticed. There are so many of you that have showed, me and my family, just through different little things, words of love and also thoughtfulness. In other words, I remember, just many times where people, I've said something and then people will bring something that is related to what I said. There's one in particular that kind of sticks out. There was a lady that came to pray with me, and she just needed some prayer. And we prayed, and she noticed that I had a record player in my office. If you've been in my office, you notice that I have a record player there. And it was like months later, like 6 months later, she comes to me, and she brings one record from the Beatles. And she says, I noticed that you had a record player, and I don't know if you like this, but I thought you may like it. And she just gave it to me. And I still remember, I have it right there in my office. And it's just the little things that sometimes make a big splash. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You simply have to be thoughtful, embrace people's needs, or wants even, and simply step into that, showing them love. Here's the third E. So we express it, we embrace their needs, and we encourage those around us, those you love. Just encourage others. Be an encourager. John is going to praise Gaius. Now, every verse we're reading, John starts by saying, dear friend, beloved, and then he says something else. In this case, he's going to encourage him. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you're doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. John praises Gaius for the tangible help that he was offering traveling missionaries, even though they were nothing to him. In other words, they were not related. They weren't friends. They didn't know each other. But he says, the people that are coming to you, you're welcoming them. That's really good. You're doing a really good job. So sometimes a simple word of encouragement when someone is doing something well is important. Now, something that we need to probably just mark and make sure that it's said, I would say that sometimes encouragement is needed not only when people are doing well, but when people maybe are failing or when people are going through a hard time. Because many times, I don't know if you've ever felt the pressure of trying to please others. That when they encourage you when things are going well, and so it's like, I want to do well more, and you're seeking that love and encouragement by trying to perform. And I tell you what, that performance-based love, love-seeking is very dangerous. Because what happens when we fail in life, and we will fail, I can tell you that at times, and we will go through hard times. What happens is that we think that we're unlovable if we fail. And so that drives us to shame, it drives us to hiding, it drives us to being dishonest with ourselves and with others. So what I would say is, as friends and family and parents and whatever relationships you have around, you encourage them when they do well, but you also encourage them even when they fail, to let them know that they can be loved even if they're not performing, to whatever level they want to. Here's the last one, the last E, elevate those you love. Simply elevate. 3 John 11, again, starts with the words, "Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God." In other words, John sometimes takes time, even to his friend Gaius, and he wants to teach him. He wants to let him know that what is good, Christian love will always seek the highest good for others. And if that means sometimes correcting or disciplining someone or whatever it may be, love doesn't mean that you always have to agree with the other person. And I think this is what we need to get straight, that we can disagree with others, and even within a church body, we're not all going to agree. And if we can't agree within the church body, think about our society, right? There are going to be people that believe all kinds of weird things about the Lord and about the Bible, that blaspheme against them. We can still love them. It doesn't mean that we can't correct them or speak truth. They're not against one another. They're not a dichotomy. You can love and still speak truth. They're one and the same. They can be one and the same. And so what we need to do is simply how we do it is just as important as what we do, to make sure that they can see that we love them. When you read John's writings, whether it's the gospel, especially the letters, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find a loving tone. So again, he uses words like beloved. He says, dear friends. He says, dear children. So even though he's rebuking and correcting, he never sounds irritated. And that's something that we can learn. We elevate others without, just putting them down. Okay, so here's how we love through words, but we also have to love in action. We love in action. So it's something that if we want our words to have power, and if we want the love of our words to have that, the ability to move people and to really transform, us and those around it, we need to live it out. Let's read verses 6 through 8 of the epistle. Remember, he's talking about those missionaries they had stopped by, those teachers, traveling teachers, and he says, they have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such people, so that we may work together for the truth. It says that the traveling teachers that went to Gaius, it says they came back and they spoke of your love. Like, what makes a person say, oh man, that person is so loving? I tell you, according to John, there are two things. He says, you received them really well, so hospitality. And then the second was like, make sure that you're sending people also well. So teachers would come, and you would, in first century, Middle East area, there were no hotels, right? They were called inns back then. These inns, for the most part, were very of bad character, consider of bad character for someone to stay there. Why? Because a lot of prostitution happened at these places. And so a Christian teacher or any believer wouldn't want to stay there. Plus, they were unsafe. Many times they would rob you, they would take advantage of you. So what they would do is they would have they would look for another person who was a Christian. And so these teachers would stay, and you welcome them, you receive them, you feed them, you give them shelter, you help them with whatever they need, and then you send them on their way with enough supplies to make it to the next place. And so basically Gaius showed generosity and showed hospitality. And I'm going to tell you this about these two things. Generosity and hospitality are the universal love language. Generosity and hospitality are going to be the two things that you can do anywhere in the world in which you can show love and it will be understood as such. It doesn't matter the language that you speak. It doesn't matter the culture. People will always understand that as acts of love. And so we always need to make sure that we are generous and that we offer hospitality. And I love one of the things that John tells Gaius. He says, make sure, please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. Many times our generosity and our hospitality is based on what we think is good, or basically whatever's comfortable to us. It's like, I'll be hospitable as long as, it's not putting me out, as long as, I can still do whatever I want to do. So it's based on our comfort. But what John tells Gaius is this: it's like, make sure that the way that you do it is honoring, not to you, not what you want to do, but it's honoring to God. So one of the questions that I want you to start asking as you give generosity and as you give hospitality is this: is this honoring to God? Like, does God think, is He honored? Is right now, like, would He be glorified? Like, is He happy that I'm doing what I'm doing, the way that I'm doing it? And that's a way to tell if maybe God is asking you to do something else. Maybe you're doing it great. That's awesome. Maybe you feel like you're honoring God. That's great. But maybe you're doing it in a stingy way, or maybe you see it as a duty. You see it like as a check mark. Make sure you're doing it in a way in which you're truly honoring the Lord. And that's what John is saying. Love needs to come from a good heart. And who are we supposed to be generous and hospitable toward? Well, there are two groups in the Bible that it's talked about. The first one is strangers. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 13, 1 and 2. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. But then he says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. So in other words, strangers to Christians are not strangers. We receive them, and we are kind toward them, and we help them in any way that we can. And that's something that just need to be part of who we are. It is interesting that I was going to preach in this message, but it was on Tuesday, so I was just starting to read on this, and there were a couple of gentlemen that were walking, and it was still really cold, and I hesitated because it's just not common to do that, and I'm getting to that point where it may be creepy if I say to someone, hey, do you need a ride, right? But I just felt pulled. I was like, I need to go back, and I was glad I was able to get them because they were walking, they were on Cherry Street, and they had to go all the way on 3rd Street by, not quite by the ambulance, but over that way. And so I was glad, simply. Now, there's been times where I felt the same pull and I don't listen, right? Because we're in a rush, because we're too worried about ourselves. And so we need to maybe stop and simply show hospitality and care and generosity just for people that we don't even know. And the Bible gives us a great reason. He's like, hey, you don't even know who these people are. They may be angels. Now, we are not doing it in order to get anything from anyone, but simply it's stating a fact that's like, hey, just be generous and hospitable. And here's the other type of people that we are supposed to show hospitality and generosity toward: kingdom workers. The Lord Jesus himself told us this. Matthew 10:41, he says, whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. So we need to be aware that God is working in people's lives. And I'm telling you, I really hope that in the next few years, God will choose some of you to go into ministry, to go into maybe full-time ministry, that God will use you to take the gospel to a place that maybe still needs to hear it. And that all of us will join them, and that we can be generous and welcome them back and celebrate with them and pray with them and for them. But now you don't have to wait until that happens with one of us. It's already happening. Harvest already has partners. I encourage you to go to our website, find out who they are, try to support them. When you hear of missionaries coming, make sure that you welcome them and thank them and encourage them in any possible way. Because just like, when we're at war, there are people on the front lines, there are people on the supply lines, and there are people producing things so they can keep it all going. And God's church is similar. Like, we're trying to go into the gates of hell, Jesus called it, and we need people that are supporting those going right there on the front lines. And John says, if you do so, you're actually a part of the work of truth. You become a part of that work. So let's make sure that we are keeping those people in mind. So we love in word, we love in action, and we love, lastly, by being present. 3 John 13 and 14 ends like this. I have much to write you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon. We will talk face to face. Man, I love it that John doesn't see loving Gaius as a duty or maybe an obligation. He sees it as a privilege and as a delight. And for us Christians, loving others is going to be a work in progress. It's not easy because, like not Demetrius, like Diotrephes, we want to be first, right? It's our nature. It's in our nature. We're selfish people. But the gospel has this ability to change our hearts so that we can start to love like Jesus. One of the main things that we need to understand, though, as John mentions it there in the letter, says that those who imitate and do what is good have seen God. So that goodness, that love, is going to come from what we see God doing in our own lives. In other words, we can't give love that we don't have. So we start by simply receiving Jesus into our lives, letting Him do His good work, and then starting to let that love overflow. In John 13, the Lord Jesus told us this. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. In a world without fuel, we would have these empty shells that we call vehicles. And in a world without love, we would have these empty shells that we call humans. We were created to love, to experience and to give love. And it's up to us to continue that love going. One of the things that we're going to give you a chance to do today is just that. Basically follow the instructions of John to maybe write a note of encouragement or support, to love in word, right? To maybe share a loving message with someone that needs it, that you know could be a neighbor, could be a family member, could be someone you know from work. Just write a message in that postcard that you have with you. And if you need a postcard, just raise your hand. One of our ushers will get a postcard to you and a pen, whatever you need. We're going to give you, maybe this time is not just that. You can invite someone. You can use that postcard to make it an invitation to have someone at your house. Just maybe someone that you've never invited, you've maybe met or thought about inviting them, but you haven't. You can invite them and then offer hospitality to them. Serve them dinner. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. One of the most humbling moments that I've experienced when it comes to hospitality happened in Africa just last year. We went into this lady's house, hut, whatever you want to call it. It was in the slums of one of the nations in Africa. And it was probably no bigger than, a little longer than my arms and probably as deep as this stage. And she had a store. And then she brought us to a back room, even smaller than that, where barely a bed and a little table and a nightstand and a chair fit. And she had us sit around the table and in that chair, and one of us just kind of on our knees. And then she went back to the store and brought us soda and kind of split it in different cups and offered it to us. And I tell you what, there's nothing more humbling than someone, I don't know what her income was, but I can tell you that soda cost her a lot more than a soda would cost you and I. And she was willing to give it, no questions asked. And with love and a smile on her face. Why can't we do that in our society? So it's time that Christians, that we take love and we spread it. So write an invitation for someone to be, and then receive them at your house. Or maybe you can do this at least. If nothing else, write a reminder to yourself to practice generosity and hospitality over the next coming weeks. Whatever it is, I think that as we love in word and love in action, God is going to continue to grow in your life. I'm going to give you some time to do that over the next few minutes. Just take some time to write a note to someone that you know needs